One of the classes from college that I'll never forget is a class called Philosophy of Religion. It was my first semester as a freshman, and we sat down in class, and on the first day of class, the professor asked us a question. Little did I know that we would spend the next 8 weeks talking about one stinking question. The question was this: if God is all-powerful, and there's nothing that God cannot do, can God create a rock too heavy for him to lift? Because if you go one way and say, well, no, God can't create a rock too heavy for him to lift because he's so powerful and so strong that, of course, he can lift everything, then you're denying God's ability to create. Yet on the other hand, if you say, well, of course God can create a rock so heavy that he cannot lift, then you're denying God's ability to lift something. And it's a circular argument that goes round and round and round and round and round. And after 8 weeks, the professor looks at us and goes, it's not a valid question. And we're like, oh man, we just spent the last 8 weeks of our lives on this crazy question. And yet, as I think about that experience, I can't help but think of some of the crazy questions that we go to God with. Today, on Tuesday of Holy Week, I'm going to invite you into a text from Matthew chapter 22. As some of the Sadducees, some of the religious leaders of the day, come to Jesus with one of their crazy questions. And their goal at this moment was to show Jesus how smart they were and to outstump Jesus. Their goal was to prove that Jesus was wrong, that their goal was to catch Jesus in the trap and make him look bad in the sight of all the people. And the Sadducees were this really religious, really popular group of folks who took great pride in believing that the resurrection of the dead wasn't a reality. And so with that as your background, here's what happens. Matthew chapter 22. And here's what they say to Jesus. Matthew 22, beginning with verse 24. Teacher, Moses said, if a man dies having no children, his brother must marry the widow and raise up offsprings for his brother. Now there were 7 brothers among us. The first married and died, and having no offspring, left his wife to his brother. So too the second and third, down to the 7th. After them all, the woman died. If in the resurrection, therefore, of the 7, whose wife will she be? For they all had her. Okay, so basically here's the question. It goes, well, Moses in the book of the law told us that if a guy dies and he has a wife and she hasn't had a kid yet, then that guy's brother has to marry her. And so what happened was there was this guy who died, had a wife, they hadn't had a kid yet, so the brother married. And then the next one, and then the next one, and the next one. So 7 times this woman had been married to these 7 brothers, and they all died. And so they're saying, well, if the resurrection is true, then who is she actually married to when she's resurrected and she goes to heaven? And they look at Jesus and they smile at one another and go, stumped him, right? Now check out Jesus' response. Matthew chapter 22, verse 29. You are wrong because you know neither the scriptures nor the power of God. If my kids were eating this and hearing this, they go, oh, snap, right? This is one of those Jesus is going, guys, you're missing the point. Not a valid question. This is terrible. You're missing the point. You are wrong because you know neither the scriptures nor the power of God. For in the resurrection, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels in heaven. And as for the resurrection of the dead, have you not read what was said to you by God? I am the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac and the God of Jacob. He is not God of the dead, but of the living. Friends, in these words, God is teaching us something about marriage, about the resurrection, and about himself. First, about marriage. He's saying, well, marriage is this thing, it's for this life. Marriage isn't about for life eternal, for everlasting life. Second, the resurrection is real. God didn't just save us in order that we could die and that be the end of us. But he saved us in order that we might live eternally with him. The resurrection is real and central to our faith. If you go to 1 Corinthians chapter 15, Paul will tell you that if the resurrection isn't a reality, then our faith is futile. and in vain. That's pretty strong words. So to deny the resurrection is to miss the point of faith. And third, he's teaching us something about God. Hear these words again in verse 32. I am, not I was, but I am the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac and the God of Jacob. He is not God of the dead, but of the living. For you see, God had made a covenant. God had made a promise to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. And just because they were gone, just because they were dead, doesn't mean that promise had stopped. But just because they had taken their last breath upon this earth, doesn't mean it was over. For the God that we believe in is a God not of the dead, but of the living. He's a God who can take us. And just like he breathed life into the first man, Adam and Eve, he can breathe new life into us. Friends, in these words, Jesus is inviting us to look at God as something beyond what we can wrap our brains around, beyond what we can compare, beyond our wildest dreams and imaginations. He's inviting us to look at God and go, man, this God can do more than I ever thought possible. And in this moment, as the Sadducees are going to God and going, man, we're ready to stump you. We're going to ask you a question. We're going to make you look bad. Jesus looks and goes, friends, you're missing the point of Scripture. And you're missing the point of God. For with God, all things are possible. And so as we're getting ready to come to the story of Jesus, if the story of Jesus had ended on a cross, if it had ended in a tomb, if it had ended in that place where Jesus was crucified, dead, and buried, and the creed ended there, we'd be missing the point. For Jesus didn't come just to die, but he came in order that he might die and rise again, in order that we might have life, not only now, but forever. And friends, as we come to him, one, God's big enough to take our questions. But sometimes as he takes our questions, he's trying to help reveal where we're missing the point. And in the midst of those moments, he points us to who he is, the God of the impossible. God bless you. Have a great week.